This week's Common Sense Award goes to Bill Maher. As you can see, I have that picture up on the screen, which I love, with him and the fake George Bush. That's not the real George Bush. He probably would have punched the actual George Bush in the face. But on his show, when talking to Republican pollster this week, Frank Luntz, Bill said this.
You have to admit, Frank, congratulations. You were picked up for 2 seasons. Thank you. You should be voting Republican. Well, that's the difference between rich Democrats and rich Republicans. Some of us vote against our interests for the better of the country.
I'm sure you could hear the riotous applause there that was in the background. Now, what he's saying, as I'll show you in a second, it's actually indisputable, and it's not said nearly enough. If people were educated on the facts, this would be common wisdom by now, but it's really not. So let me just start by saying that I understand why 1% of the population has a compelling case to vote for Republicans if they were really so inclined to vote solely based on their own wallet. But outside of that one criterion, it would be irrational to vote Republican. So take the deficit, for example, for the first issue. If you really consider yourself a fiscal conservative, it would make sense to vote for Democrats because they've actually got a much better record on the issue of the deficit. They passed the Statutory Pay-As-You-Go Act in 2010, which mandated by law that any proposed legislation is paid for either by spending cuts or tax increases or both. A law that George Bush scrapped in 2002, by the way. The Democrats reinstated that. Also, in modern history, Bill Clinton was the only president to balance the budget and leave us with a surplus. George W. Bush, George H.W. Bush, and Ronald Reagan all left us with record deficits. A new book called Bulls and Bears reviewed 80 years of U.S. economic history and found that Democrats have beaten Republicans in 11 out of 12 economic categories, including months in recession, stock market performance, and a whole bunch others. And even in private sector job growth, which the Republicans love to trumpet, that they believe in the private sector and the Democrats only care about government. Even in that area, the Democrats beat them. It's the Bill Clinton statistic that he brought up during his DNC speech. He said, since 1961, our private economy has produced 66 million jobs. So what's the job score? Republicans created 24 million. Democrats created 42 million. And in another book by James Gilligan called Why Some Politicians Are More Dangerous Than Others, it's been shown that there is even a direct link between crime, violence, and death, including suicides, rising sharply during Republican administrations and dropping sharply during Democratic administrations. And it ties directly into policies. It turns out that when you have a strong social safety net, if you have a rising middle-class income and more accommodations for the poor, turns out people are happier. Go figure. There have even been studies showing that people who live in social democratic countries or welfare states, I know that word is demonized nowadays, but people who live in those places report being happier than any other places in the world. And just really quick before I finish up, Republicans love to act every election cycle like their ideas are new and have never been tried. Ideas like trickle-down economics, for example. We tried it under Reagan. The economy fell off of a cliff at the end of his presidency. We tried it under George W. Bush. In 8 years of Bush's presidency, we actually lost over 300,000 jobs. Just to show you how bad that is and put it in perspective, under Clinton's administration, we created about 22 million jobs. And under Obama, during his economic recovery, we've created about 5 million jobs in 4 years. And even at face value, if you believe in no government and no regulation, that place exists in the world. Somalia. They even have a lot of guns too. It's a Republican paradise. And we've also had a time with no government in the US, or very, very little government. It was called the Industrial Revolution. It had disastrous working conditions, no labor laws, no weekend. People were basically considered spokes in a machine. And 99% of the population was repressed, while 1% made all the money. So for pointing out a seldom discussed reality, that rich Democrats who vote to raise their marginal income tax rate by 3% by voting for Democrats are actually patriotic Americans who abandon selfishness for the betterment of the country, Bill Maher gets this week's Common Sense Award.